So my name is Aisling Roche. I'm a Programme Manager here with the Royal Irish Academy, and I project coordinate the Grangegorman Histories project. So this afternoon I just want to, in this presentation, introduce this project of research and shared discovery and share some of the detail of the mission, the vision, the values of the project, some of our programme deliveries to date, the impact of that work, and an introduction to some of the activities for the next phase of the project between 22 and 25. So Grangegorman Histories is a public history project. And a public history project is a history project that exists beyond the realms of traditional academia. Conscious saying that, of course, in the Royal Irish Academy. But it is a public history project of the Dublin City Council, Grangegorman Development Agency, the Health Service Executive, local communities, the National Archives, Royal Irish Academy, and TU Dublin. So it's quite a considerable collaboration of interests in this particular project. For those of you who are not familiar with Grangegorman, Grangegorman is on Dublin's north side. It is a 73-acre site between Stoneybatter and Phibsborough, just south of the canal and north of the Liffey. So it's quite close to the city centre and an area with an extraordinary history. The site over the past 250 years has been the location of a workhouse, a prison, and a very large psychiatric facility, most recently known as St Brendan's Hospital. But that site is currently being redeveloped as a health and education campus for the HSE, TU Dublin, and the local community. So the project was formed back in 2019, and in June of 2020 we launched our foundation document, which we did online, of course, because if you recall, in June of 2020 we were at the height of rolling lockdowns, and this foundation document is available on our website, and that shares, amongst other things, the mission, vision, values, and the programme of the project. So the mission of the project is very simple. We want to uncover, catalogue, and commemorate the history of Grangegorman. And we have very deliberately chosen a title of Grangegorman Histories because there are so many histories associated with this one particular area, and all of those histories require attention. All of those histories require uncovering and cataloguing and commemoration. The vision of the project then is about the multifaceted histories and the Grangegorman area, and the creation of an ambitious programme, which we have already started to deliver and have plans to deliver more over the next couple of years, that will be of benefit locally, nationally, and internationally. Given that the project involves examining histories that are challenging, the histories of the treatment of people with mental illness, the treatment of people with intellectual disability, histories of confinement and incarceration. These are all challenging histories, and as a result a lot of consideration went into the values and how we would approach a programme to uncover, catalogue and commemorate those histories. So our intention is to be comprehensive in our histories approach, acknowledging the nature of the past and the nature of our past as a society, but in particular to help to destigmatise mental illness and our institutional attitudes to institutional confinement in this country and elsewhere. There are, without doubt, distressing elements to these histories, and it is very important that every approach we take and every piece that we programme acknowledges that distress. That distress can be directly impacting, it can be as a result of peripheral impact, and it can be as a result of association. So it's important that that is core to how we approach the project. You know, to do a project like this, you need to think about, well, why would you do it? And ultimately it is to impact and to have a transformative effect, to create a better society. Of course, accessibility is a key element, and finally, in stimulating active research, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, and opening minds through education to learn more about these very difficult topics and difficult histories. So the oversight and management of the project is with the Grangegorman Histories expert working group, and this is the working group. There are representatives here from all of the founding partners, and this is a very dedicated group, and I can see our chair here is with us today, Dr. Philip Cohen, and this is a very dedicated, hard-working group of people who have put together an extraordinary programme and who are very heavily involved in the whole delivery of the project. So I mentioned earlier that we launched our foundation document back in June of 2020, and that document is on our website, grangegormanhistories.ie. And in that programme, we included the implementation plan, our programme of activities. That programme obviously was conceived in a pre-COVID world where we thought everything was going to be in person and it was going to be a very person-based and person-centred approach. So we had to adapt, and we have put most of the programme to date online. So if you are brand new to Grangegorman Histories, almost every element of the project to date is available on our website, so you can catch up very quickly now. We most recently had an in-person event and culture night with the walking tours, and it was a real privilege actually to be part of that and to see people come along for that. But the implementation plan is broken down into 3 key pathways: people, places, and practices. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that plan in those contexts. So here are just a list really of some of the kind of projects and elements that we've been working on for the past couple of years. And I wanted to highlight 1 or 2, particularly Grangegorman Lives, because this is a very neat little element of the project. So while we were in lockdown, of course, access to the archive from Grangegorman in the National Archives, which is an extraordinary archive and an extraordinary record of social history in Ireland, not just Dublin, but Ireland. Of course, it was in the archives and we couldn't access it. So we needed to find sources that were available to us. And Ruth Hegarty came up with the great idea that we should link in with our own colleagues here in the Academy in the Dictionary of Irish Biography and source lives, autobiographies of people who were influenced or who were influenced or influenced the life in Grangegorman. And as a result, we have a series of biographies of individuals who at some point in their lives may have transitioned through Grangegorman, or may have found themselves incarcerated in Grangegorman, or were born in Grangegorman and went on to live remarkable lives and make an impact on their society. So there's a really interesting catalogue of lives, well worth a look, and some that will raise an eyebrow because you didn't realise there was a link to Grangegorman. Our oral history project, this is our jewel in our crown. We want to record recollections of life in Grangegorman. So we are currently working with the former staff members from St Brendan's Hospital to begin recording interviews with them to collect their recollections of what life was like in the hospital. So it's a very interesting element of the histories and an interesting element of gathering histories. Our plan ultimately is that those recordings will live on the Digital Repository Ireland, also a project of the Academy, where they will be accessible for future research. The commissioning research and relating to life in Grangegorman. So we have a series called Exploring Grangegorman, which is a series of online essays where we have commissioned historians to do research on specific elements of histories of Grangegorman. These histories are intended to be kind of introductory, the key element being the bibliography at the bottom and the encouragement, that last value of stimulating active research to encourage people to go seek out those primary sources and learn more. In terms of the places of Grangegorman, there's quite a lot of pieces here that are actually online. So the Festival of History piece from back in 2020, which has been viewed over 2,000 times, was a panel discussion relating back to the history of Grangegorman's site of the cholera hospital from 1832 and the history of epidemic on the site, relating that to the flu epidemic from 1919 and then on to, at that point, the pandemic that we were all experiencing at that time. It's a really interesting discussion. I highly recommend you have a look. We also have a wonderful, and this was a pure privilege for me personally, to meet Ivor Brown, who was the last resident medical superintendent in Grangegorman, who's now in his early 90s. And we interviewed Ivor, and that interview is also available on the website. And the Timepiece podcast, which is a really interesting history of the turret clock in the Clock Tower building, which turns out to be the oldest known flatbed turret clock mechanism in the world. And until it was discovered in the 1980s, at that point it was thought that the oldest known flatbed turret clock mechanism in the world was Big Ben in London. So we toppled that particular historical fact. The Hoardings Project, I want to highlight this one because this is a beautiful piece that Fidelma Slattery, our own graphic designer here, created a beautiful artwork that has been hand-painted onto the construction hoardings in Grangegorman. And it is a vision of a reflection of the histories of Grangegorman. So she has produced lovely images that are both dark and light. She has included lovely symbolic gestures, including the Greek symbol of psi, which of course is for psychology and psychiatry, keys, which are of course emblematic of the histories of confinement on the site, but also emblematic of the fact that there were a lot of personal belongings left from individuals who sadly died in the institution, and their front door keys were amongst their belongings. So these are keys that sadly were never used again. That's a deeply affecting thought, but certainly emblematic of how an awful lot of people encountered Grangegorman. And also just to highlight, next Monday we will be launching another podcast, and this one is called Instituting Grangegorman, and it's tracing the history of what is now known as the TU Dublin Lower House. But this building is a recently restored building that was actually the original Richmond Lunatic Asylum, built on the site in 1812. So it's a wonderful opportunity to trace that history. It is a difficult history because it is a history that began with great optimism, but sadly is plagued by overcrowding and challenges, lack of resources, and the building eventually became completely derelict, but has been recently restored and is now a key site in the campus for TU Dublin. But more importantly, it's a real living history because so many of the architectural elements have been left exposed and are visually available, so that it invites query about the history of the building, the history of the site, so that the history of the space remains with the new generation who use it. The practices in Grangegorman, again, there's a wide range of practices that are under examination and for future examination here. One element here I want to highlight is the very first piece of this project back in 2019, was an ethics of access and preservation policies seminar, and it took place here in the Academy in May of that year. As a direct result of that piece, the HSE set up an internal historical mental health records steering group, rolls readily off the tongue. And that particular steering group has 3 members of our own working group involved, and they are looking at reworking the national protocols in accessing historical mental health records so that the international best practice of applying the 100-year rule will apply to historical mental health records here. Obviously, this project's intention was to ensure that the Grangegorman archive was available on this premise, but of course, that protocol will now apply to all of the historical mental health records for all of the institutions in the country. Personally, I think this may be one of the biggest legacy pieces for this project. It will have a huge impact on how we view mental illness historically, and we hope will impact how we view it currently and into the future. Resources for further study. This is a piece that we commissioned from historian Dr. Grace O'Keefe, and Grace did an incredible job in researching all of the known primary and secondary sources of record for Grangegorman since 1770. And we published this piece on the website, and it's available for anyone to have a look at or download. Only print if you need to, please. This particular listing could be helpful for anyone who's just casually curious, or for a professional researcher who's looking for as much material as they can find. There are links so that anything that's readily available online can be accessed immediately. There are guidance to how to access the National Archives archive of Grangegorman, and also she has included very helpfully a guidance on how to use the large databases, because search terms like Richmond, for example, could bring anything up to 4,000 results. So how to narrow down your search so that you can get the best possible results when looking up this material. This very much goes back to that value of stimulating active research, and we really hope people will take time to have a look at it and engage with the sheer range of records available. A document like this is a living document, and we are conscious that there may be some omissions, or there may be new material that could be added to this. So if anyone has identified a piece that should be included in that listing, please contact me, and my contact details will be at the end of the presentation, and share it with us, because we can add it to future iterations to ensure that the listing is as comprehensive as possible. Upcoming events, I've already mentioned the podcast launch next Monday. There are a number of our Exploring Grangegorman series essays in train at the moment on topics such as Grangegorman and sport, The history of Grangegorman Transportation Depot. During the 1830s to the 1880s, over 3,000 women and girls were transported to Van Stiemen's Land from Grangegorman. So we've commissioned an essay to chart that history and share that history, which is, again, another very difficult history. We will also have supported TU Dublin Conservatoire in the commissioning of an original play depicting some of the experiences in Grangegorman, and that's an original work that will be performed later this year. And of course, we're just finalising our 2022-2025 programme, which will be launched later in the year. So I want to say thank you very much. Our website is grangegormanhistories.ie. There is a huge amount of material there, everything from panel discussions, podcasts, resources, and a lot of background information on the project itself. So please have a little look on the site. The contact details are grangegormanhistories@ggda.ie. So if you have any questions or anything you want to know more about the project, please email me. Thank you very much.